Hey guys, hope you're well. It's Stuart Tomlinson, Warrior Collective, back once again with Inside to That. Today we're going to be speaking to Dr. Mary Quinton, who's the Assistant Professor of Sports Psychology at the University of Birmingham. And rather than me trying to explain more about what Mary is researching and what she specialises in, we may as well go straight to it. Hi Mary, how are you?
Hi, Stuart. Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Oh no, it's amazing to have you on, and I have to thank you once again for sparing the time. I know you're very busy with your work and your research, so it's a huge honour to have you on. Like I've just mentioned, then, rather than me trip over words and get all the nuances wrong, can you tell me a little bit more about your role and your research at the University of Birmingham?
Yeah, sure. So, my role is assistant professor in sports psychology. So, what I do as part of that role is a bit of teaching and a bit of research. So, when I teach on modules, I tend to teach on the kind of psychological factors that underpin performance, but also mental health and well-being. And my research is kind of aligned with that, really. So my research is mainly looking at the different types of mental skills and mental techniques that athletes use to be able to perform, but also to be able to thrive in their sort of day-to-day life as individuals. But I'm also interested in how those types of skills and techniques can also be used by other people, not just athletes, but everyone really in our day to day lives. So, there's a kind of a broad overview in terms of performance, but also I'm really interested in the more holistic sense as well in terms of mental health and well-being.
I mean, it's an interesting kind of way that you've kind of worded that. Do you see them as being separate things or things that are often work against each other in terms of the sport side of pushing yourself mentally and obviously your mental well-being?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think probably historically there's been more of a focus on performance, but I think more recently, and I say recently in terms of probably the past sort of 5 to 10 years, there's really been more of a focus in terms of viewing the athlete more holistically in terms of making sure that their participation in sport isn't causing any detriments to their development, and especially for young athletes. I'm sure some people might have heard in the news recently in terms of some of the news around British gymnastics and the recent reviews that have looked into that. And there was very much a sort of a main focus in terms of there was a focus on medals rather than well-being. So I think a lot has changed recently, and changed for the better in my opinion in terms of making sure that you can still have high performance, but also to encourage environments that promote a strong culture in terms of mental health and well-being as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, like you said, historically, and especially if you come from my experience in sports, which was always very combat sports orientated, and there's that sort of, you have to make your athletes tough, you have to make your children tough, and I guess that ethos can come across in that it is all about the win, all about the competition, and you have to sacrifice this, and this. But so how do you differentiate between a negative environment and a positive environment with regards to what you've just said?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the first thing to probably say is it's not a one size fits all approach, I guess, and that how an individual perceives something is going to depend on the support network that they have around them, and how they interact with sort of different people and things in and around their environment. So, I guess it's not a one size fits all approach, but in terms of what a good environment would look like, well, there's a theory within sports psychology which is used quite a lot. It's called basic psychological needs theory, which is kind of part of a broader theory of motivation. And it suggests that we all kind of have three basic psychological needs. And these three psychological needs are the need for autonomy, so the need to kind of have choice and kind of ownership of what we do. The second one is the need for competence, so feeling like we're kind of good at something and doing well at something. And the third one is relatedness, so that ability to feel connected to other people. And a good environment and good sort of people within that environment should try to really promote these three basic psychological needs, and that will help athletes, young people in particular. The results have shown that it's been associated with sort of better well-being, better mental well-being. So really, when we're thinking about sort of athletes and how maybe coaches and parents even, support staff and anyone who's kind of involved in that athletes network, the more we can try to satisfy these basic psychological needs, then that's going to promote more of a kind of empowering environment for these athletes.
So on the flip side then, how would you describe a bad environment, a negative environment, one that needs change?
Yeah, it's kind of the flip side. So there's also research that's looked at the flip side of it, and it's shown that if you have more of a controlling environment, so for example, just telling someone what to do, not really giving them much choice in it, an environment that makes you feel like you're not very good at what you do, and an environment that where you feel quite isolated, you don't feel able to have strong connections and relationships with others, then that's kind of what we call a disempowering environment, where there's perhaps more of a focus on sort of performance related high pressure goals that might not be realistic to achieve, for example. So all of those things together kind of thwart these needs that athletes may have.
So if you were to speak to, let's say, a coach or a club, when you spoke earlier about mental skills and mental training, what are the things that you advise along these mental techniques and mental skills that a coach or a club can implement with their athletes or young athletes on a daily or ongoing basis?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think my research has been very much underpinned by that theory that I just mentioned. So I guess that would be my first go-to in terms of what are the kind of regular behaviours that you do that you can make sure help satisfy these needs. So how can you build into your training sessions, for example? How can you help give athletes choice in what they might do in terms of drills or particular skills to focus on? How can you build up the level and intensity of your exercises in terms of building that competence for people, so you're not introducing something that's not realistic at the start of a season, for example, where people might fail in terms of levels of fitness, might not be quite there yet, and things like that. So how can you gradually build that? And relatedness as well. So not just between the coach and the athletes, but also between the athletes themselves, because we know that social support is a really big protective factor for mental health as well. So I think those are some of the things I'd maybe initially say. And then sort of another side route, I guess, of my research is looking into the types of strategies that people use when they're performing and playing sport. So in terms of how we can try to regulate our emotions. And it's been shown that when we use strategies such as trying to reappraise or change how we see a situation, that can be associated with more positive mental well-being. Whereas if we try to suppress our emotions and really trying to hide and just put it to one side, then that can be associated with reduced mental well-being. But again, I'll kind of add the caveat that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it very much would need to be tailored to kind of the group who you're working with, the sport that they're playing in, and so on.
So obviously we talk about you've done a lot of research with young people in terms of this area of sports psychology. What are the main issues or difficulties that you've come across that young athletes experience at any level, whether that's first time grassroots or an individual who's been training for a lot longer?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, one of the biggest challenges for young people at the moment is the kind of times that we're living in. It's a really tough world for young people, and there's the skills that you learn as a young person that kind of serve you and set you up for life. A lot of these skills you learn in sport, or sport gives you the opportunity to learn some of these skills. So, decision making, problem solving, like I said, regulating your emotions. Um, but it's quite challenging for young people because of their brain development, and the stage and how the brain forms over time. So I guess I'll ask you a question because I'm interested to know the answer. At what age do you think the brain is fully developed? What age do you think you have your kind of adult brain?
Ooh. Now, had you asked me this a few years ago, I'd have probably gone quite young, but I'm guessing that I'm actually more erring on the side of being a bit older now. And early 20s, or is that too late?
Yeah, yes. No, so it's 25, which when I first learnt that was definitely later than I thought as
Mm,
well. Um, but the reason why I bring it up is because the last area of the brain to develop is this kind of area right at the front of your head, what's called your prefrontal cortex. And that's the area that's associated with all these skills, so problem solving, making decisions, and so on. So actually, there's a reason why young people can find these types of skills difficult to learn and refine. Have this stereotypical image of teenagers, but actually, it's a tough time for them, and it's a tough time because they're still learning and they're still refining these skills because of their brain development. So I think with that context in mind, I think that's one of the difficulties that young people face is sort of um, coming up against different stressful situations and maybe not necessarily having the refined skills and techniques to be able to deal with them yet because of their stage of development.
And obviously, we mentioned about some of the benefits of taking part in sport for young people. What do you see are the main benefits? Because obviously, children take part in sport from a young age. Obviously, the sports may change, and again, as they get more older, there is more expected of older age groups, especially if it's a more competitive sport. You mentioned gymnastics. That's one of those sports that you have to be very competitive at a young age, otherwise you'll never get to that elite level. So there's a lot more pushing in some sports than there are others because of the time frame for what that sport deems as being, that you've got to have these markers by this point, otherwise you're not going to get it. And again with gymnastics, I mentioned that because I know they've always had markers for if you're not at this point by age 12, then you're pretty much done. You're not getting to the Olympics, and I've always seen that as quite a shame really to put on a 12-year-old is like if you're not at this marker you're pretty much done in this sport. What do you think are the benefits of sport then in general terms? And like I've just mentioned there with gymnastics, are we too focused on the win and the result and not enough on the actual benefits themselves?
I think it kind of resonates with was it some of the like news highlights in the Olympics and around figure skating and things like that, for example, where you have again it's kind of similar in terms of performing well at a very young age, but the amount of pressure that's put on these young people, given some of the stuff that I've just talking about as well, I think is a lot, and that's why I'm a strong believer in really trying to focus on this more holistic approach and make sure that I guess yeah, recognizing that a lot of time and resource does need to go into becoming an elite athlete, particularly in these sports where you perhaps reach that at a younger age, but also recognizing that you know for example, the onset of symptoms associated with mental health problems, that's actually around the age of kind of, I guess, university aged students. And so when we think about that, we need to be really careful to kind of build this supportive environment that not just focuses on their mental well-being, but you can have an environment that where you can perform well, but the mental well-being is also an important part of that. And I think there's probably still a lot of work to do in terms of that. And it's not just, you know, one person that can kind of lead that. It very much needs to be a whole kind of systems approach. So kind of filtering down from, you know, national governing bodies, policies and things like that. And I guess, you know, things like mental health literacy programs for, you know, coaches, parents, for them to be able to support their young children who are competing in these sports as well. Because I'm a strong believer that it is possible to have high performance and high well-being at young ages, but that it needs to be considered very carefully and with, you know, all the kind of relevant stakeholders in mind. So yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, it answered part of it, and in fact, I'll just rephrase the first part of it. And so, if you were speaking to a parent about, you know, the benefits of, you know, a young child or a young person taking part in sport, what would you say are the main benefits for taking sport? What are the main potentially good benefits for a young child to gain from taking part in sport?
Yeah. I mean, I guess first of all, there's the obvious in terms of, you know, physical activity and exercise and all the benefits that kind of produces. I think something that for me youth sport has to have is fun. I think you know, we talk about intrinsic types of motivation. So what I mean by that is doing something for the love of it because you love to do it and you're not doing it for external reasons. So for, you know, because your parents want you to, or because you know, there's money or medals associated with it. I think particularly at a very young age, for me, like there has to be the love of the sport there. But I also think a big one of the main benefits for me for sport is that kind of building relationships. Like I said, one of our basic psychological needs is relatedness. So the ability to feel connected with others, the ability to form relationships that, you know, may be long-lasting relationships. They may go on to later in life. And I think that's so important because on the flip side, one particular area that I'm also interested in and sort of going a bit more into now is loneliness and the kind of effects of that. And actually a kind of really shocking statistic around loneliness is it has the same impact on mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that's why for me, you know, it's so important to have opportunities to build relationships, social skills from a young age, so that we can really try and, you know, focus on the positive side of things and take a more preventative approach, I guess.
And you mentioned as well about obviously the potentially difficult times that a teenager of a certain age faces with regards to mental health. How can a coach or a parent best support their athletes or their children of this particular age as they're involved in their sport? You know, this kind of like 14 to 19 bracket, I guess. I mean, and I know it can come earlier, it can go later than that, but I'm guessing that's a particular age range that you see a lot of the issues start to arise.
Yeah, and you know, I talk about mental health literacy programs, and obviously that would be fantastic, but also recognizing that not everyone has the resources to be able to run and deliver and access these programs. So in an ideal world, yes, these programs would kind of be rolled out, but in terms of just day to day, some of the research I've been involved with, just kind of briefly to give context to this. So I said about being interested about the types of techniques athletes use, but with people sort of maybe not in sporting populations. So we've been running a kind of mental skills training program, but within a local youth homeless charity, with the kind of notion that actually, you know, anyone can benefit from developing their mental skills, and it can help them in whatever performance setting they're in. So yes, performance could be sport, but performance could be performing well at college or performing well in your job, for example. So yeah, I've been doing a bit of research into that, and finding that any type of young people can benefit from using these skills. And why I mention that is because one of the main things I've kind of learned and really taken away from that research is just the power of listening, and the power of kind of validating thoughts and opinions, because I think it's so tempting, and I still do it myself sometimes, but to want to fix problems and to want to kind of fix something for someone. And by all means, it comes from a good place, but actually sometimes one of the most powerful things we can do is listen and validate. So yeah, perhaps the advice I would give is that, in terms of, parents are probably the ones who know their children best, and can probably notice sort of subtle changes and things like that. So actually having those conversations, or create an environment that helps young people to feel that they can have those conversations. And there's a lot about stigma around mental health and so on, but if we can try to create those environments that make it more safe and comfortable to have these open conversations, then yeah, that's probably the advice I would give, in terms of just the power of listening and kind of checking in with people.
So do you have any particular techniques that you could recommend to, let's say, a young athlete listening to this? Are there something that that you give to young athletes to take away that they can do on their own, or is it tend to be more with the coach or with the parent?
No, absolutely. There's lots of techniques and skills, and I like to say that athletes can kind of have their own toolbox of techniques, and everyone's toolbox is going to look slightly different, depending on the sport, depending on the type of situation that they're in. But actually, and a bit of a plug, but if you head to our website, which is sprintproject.org, then we've got a variety of tools on our website that are designed exactly for that purpose, in terms of people being able to do it themselves as kind of more of a self-management, self-regulation kind of activity. So on there, for example, there are what we call some grounding techniques. So grounding techniques really help if you're in a situation where you're feeling really overwhelmed by something. And I'm sure we've probably all had that feeling at one point or another, where you try to sit down and focus on something, but something else has happened during the day, and you just can't kind of think straight. So grounding techniques can help us kind of, I guess, for want of a better word, feel grounded again, and kind of reset ourselves to help us feel a bit calmer in our minds. So there's a few examples of ones like that. One which may seem quite funny, and particularly in hot weather, but it sprang to mind, was actually giving yourself a big hug. So taking like a duvet or a massive blanket or something like that, and actually just kind of wrapping it around yourself for, doesn't have to be long, can be however short or long that you want. But actually just that process of doing that, and just kind of taking a moment to be present, and just giving yourself a deliberate break from something, that can really help reset and kind of help you to go again. So yeah, there's some examples of grounding techniques, but there's also some techniques and tools that can help in terms of goal setting, recognizing your strengths, building your emotional awareness, for example. So yeah, I'm not sure if I can pick one and elaborate more, but yeah, there's a kind of variety of ones that I would suggest.
No, they sound great, and it's great to hear that there's a resource that people can check out, and I'm sure anyone listening will, and I'll definitely put some links in the sections below about them. So obviously, sometimes coaches, again, we're talking traditionally, they're pushed for time. They've got to juggle this physical training, the fitness, the technique, and I guess sometimes mental well-being and anything that revolves around that might get pushed to the bottom. But in your opinion, is there a big correlation between success at high level and being in a good place mentally? Because actually then there's a real kind of need then, I guess, for the mental well-being of the athletes to take a higher priority in terms of the training that coaches and clubs offer their young athletes and obviously older athletes as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good and probably quite a topical question as well. I'm sure people have probably seen in the news articles and things like that about, the elite athletes at, for example, Olympics, Commonwealth Games, who perhaps have come out in terms of, drawing attention to and disclosing their mental health difficulties that they're experiencing. So you can perform at a high level with a mental illness. And in terms of one of the models that underpins my work, it's a model it's called Keyes's mental health continuum model. And it suggests that people can experience both mental health in terms of the sort of more positive side, but also mental illness at the same time. So you can be functioning well, functioning well in terms of performing, but also having a mental illness at the same time. And so I guess the takeaway I'm trying to get from that is that even if you're diagnosed with a mental illness at some point, leading up to an athletic career, that shouldn't stop you from being able to achieve those top levels, because we can also experience the sort of more positive sides of mental well-being as well. But I guess going back to your point about the coaches and having limited time, I guess I come back to thinking about training the brain as kind of a muscle as well, even though it's not a muscle. We go to the gym because we want to train our muscles and build muscle and things like that, and it's the same for our brain. We need to be able to spend time and work on our training associated with that to be able to refine these skills as well. So yeah, that's kind of my answer on that one.
If you could only say like a few things, like a few key points to a coach listening to this that they could take away and implement into their coaching or their club, whatever sport they teach at today, what would those points be? What would be the main takeaways, do you think?
I think for me, it's facilitating an environment that allows people to feel comfortable approaching you about any difficulties that they may have. So recognizing that by all means you might not be an expert in mental health, and they're probably not coming to you because they're expecting you to solve all of their problems, but they're probably coming to you because they feel like they're struggling with an aspect of their sport. And actually, from what I've said in terms of the power of relationships, the power of listening and validating, actually just coming across in a way that's relatable and that, I guess, approachable is kind of the main word. Having that for me is really a powerful thing in terms of letting athletes know that you're open to that. And then, there's so many resources online, excellent, evidence-based resources in terms of mental health from the NHS, from charities such as Mind. it means that you don't have to be an expert yourself in mental health, but if you just know a couple of these resources that you can signpost to, then actually that might in turn help the athlete just feel a sense of kind of comfort, and like I say, relatedness in terms of, okay, I'm not alone in this. I've got people in my support network around me who care for me and who can support me in that. So yeah, I think my main takeaway would be to help build that sort of approachability on that.
And finally, does it matter then? Because obviously there's more pressure for athletes, young and old, as they compete at a higher level. Are there more specific things that a coach or even an athlete needs to be aware of in terms of their mental well-being, or the mental skills that they need to train when they start to creep up to that Commonwealth, Olympic level?
Yeah, I think again, I guess adding the caveat that it's going to be different for everyone, and it will be different for athletes in an individual sport compared to a team sport and things like that. But I guess in terms of things to be aware of as you're going up the competitive levels, I guess, do you have time in your schedule for kind of self-care strategies and things like that? And I know that athletes' training schedules at an elite level will be very, very busy and very high. So, it doesn't have to be sort of a 3-hour mindfulness meditation or something like that. But I guess being mindful of what are the self-care strategies you can build into your daily routine to make sure that you've got some protected time to kind of check in with yourself and focus on you as well. I guess that goes for athletes at a high level, but also coaches as well. There's a lot of pressure on them as well. So yeah, I guess this all kind of comes back to, for me, building an environment, across all different levels that allows us to have these conversations around mental well-being, more readily, and promote an environment that really, promotes thriving of individuals for both their performance but also their well-being as well.
So can you give me an example of a couple of those self-care strategies then that you just spoke about?
Yeah, I can give you some examples that I like to do. So I guess during a working day, for me, it's quite easy to just find myself sitting at my computer and not taking a break. Bad habits like eating lunch at my desk and things like that. So actually just making sure that I have time to go outside for some fresh air and a break. So nothing too complicated, but actually something that allows you to kind of detach from the environment that you're in and have some time to kind of detach from that. I'd say in the winter, it could be like, making a hot chocolate or having a bath or something like that. For me, a big one that I try to do and perhaps don't succeed as much is read a book, because I have so much screen time in my day. A lot of my work is on a computer, so actually trying to have a bit of time where I can read a physical book as well. Those are all things that work for me in terms of kind of checking in with myself. But yeah, like I said, it will kind of vary for everyone, but there are a few examples.
No, it's really interesting, and it's one of those concepts that flies under the radar but keeps cropping up. It tends to crop up when things go wrong, doesn't it? We talk about they were in a difficult place, and and then we reverse engineer that. Well, how did they get into that difficult place? Stress, pressure, no systems in place to check, no systems in place to help resolve those issues. So there's been a lot of good questions that you've answered there. Again, just remind me, for anyone listening to this podcast or watching this on YouTube, if they wanted to learn more about your work and even the things that you mentioned before, where should they visit?
Yeah, so it's the Sprint project. So Sprint as in running, and project. So all one word, sprintproject.org, and that will take you to our website from our research group. And like I said, there's quite a few tools. There's some interactive tools actually on the website itself. Or you can download versions if you're the type of person who prefers like a printout and that. But there's also quite a lot of blogs on there as well. So different members of our team have blogged about sort of various different areas of their expertise as well. But all kind of, I guess, centered around this theme of mental skills, techniques, and mental well-being. So yeah, by all means, check that out. And yeah, happy to answer or chat anymore if anyone's got any comments or questions.
And should they just contact you through the website, or do you have social media? Or how should they speak to you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, so that's probably the best way. So I can sort of give you my Twitter handle as well, which is at Mary_Q6. So yeah, tend to sort of tweet various things related to my research and interesting articles and things like that. So yeah, that's probably the best place.
Okay, amazing. Well, I've got to say thank you again for having spent this time to speak to me today. It's been a real pleasure and a real, again, you know, I love to speak about these particular aspects of sports psychology, sports science, because again, myself, I've been involved in sports all my life, and you know, as you get older, you kind of look back on hindsight, don't you? You kind of examine the things that you kind of grew up with, and you kind of, oh, you know, you start to recognize the good things and also the things where, okay, maybe that wasn't so good. And again, you know, refer to my own experience. Sometimes in combat sports, we were a bit further behind other sports because it's always been about that, you being tough, you know, being, you know, if you're going to fight, you've got to earn your right to be in this gym. And I guess sometimes, you know, that's where some of the issues that you've raised today have not been met. So it's been really interesting. And I'm a huge believer in what you're doing. So thank you once again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And for everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please go and check out Mary's website. I know I will be doing after this podcast. Well, thank you once again, Mary.
Thanks, Stuart. It's been great to talk to you.